I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. And today I am returning, of course, to the Siamese cats in the latest Cat Who book. So we shall let the Siamese cat stare into your soul for just a moment longer. Okay. So today's book, The Cat Who Played Brahms. This is the Cat Who book where everything changes. Up to this point, there has been a certain formula for the four books previous. That is, Qwillerish shows up at the newspaper, the editor or an editor gives him a job to do that he is less than enthused about for whatever reason. He goes, he meets his colorful cast of characters, moves into a new apartment, and has various adventures involving the cats. The Cat Who Played Brahms breaks this up because this book opens with Qwillerish deciding, of all things, to go on a vacation. In point of fact, for the first time, he's being offered a job that he'd really be interested in. His good old buddy Arch Riker informs him that Percy, the managing editor of the newspaper, has decided to hand Qwillerish the role of investigation reporter. That he'd get to actually look into things. He'd get to do the kind of reporting that he really, really got into newspapering to do. That he'd have the chance to look to do investigative reporting into murders or politics or all of that stuff that he used to do before he got divorced and became an alcoholic, and hasn't done for the past couple of years in the in universe time. And so he's being faced with this really, really great offer, but at the same time, he's had a tough couple years. He's had a problematic couple years. And he's been talking to his Aunt Fanny, who isn't actually his aunt, but she was very close friends with his mother, and she has a lot of money, and invites him up north and offers him the use of her cabin out in the woods, and he decides he's going to go up into small town northern America in, like, Minnesota or something. And with that, he moves to Pickaxe. And Pickaxe is a city or part of a county that declares itself to be 400 miles north of everywhere. And throughout this book, he's not looking for news stories. He's not interviewing people with a particular theme. Because, of course, the first four books, because he was doing art reporting, because he was doing interior decorating reporting, because he was doing antiquing reporting, because he was doing restaurant coverage, with each of those, he was meeting people in a particular theme, a collective of people who were all in the same business, in the same wheelhouse. And now he's up north. Now, small towns, of course, people in small towns always do have that commonality of being from the same small town, of knowing everybody, of knowing everybody's parents and grandparents, and having known everyone their whole lives and your whole life. And so there is a commonality there, of course. There is a cultural commonality to a small town that is not the same as in a large city, which tends to have many smaller subcultures within it, that only occasionally form a significant portion of the greater culture of the city. Because I will be honest with you, multiculturalism is not in fact a common culture. It is an acceptance and willingness to have large numbers of varied cultures within a relatively small space. And heading up to Pickaxe is a bit of a shock to the system for him because it's a small town where no one locks their doors, where nobody feels any compunction about just showing up at your front door and walking in, and if they need to, fix the window in your house, well, then they'll walk into your house and fix the window and walk right back out again while you're out shopping, because nobody thinks that it's really that important. Now, this is also still the end of the 60s into the early 70s, so certainly there is a difference in that during the 60s and 70s, parents were somewhat more willing to let their children out of their sight than they are now. But there's still that difference. And throughout this book, we see a lot of Qwillerin, in a lot of ways, divesting himself of his old life. He has a girlfriend that he wound up getting in the last book. This time, the girlfriend is Rosemary, who runs a health food store and who is very nice, a very sweet person, but does tend to nag a little bit about health food. She's one of those people who really only wants the best for everybody, but just can't stop herself from saying, "Oh, you shouldn't have that chocolate. Oh, you shouldn't have that. Oh, you shouldn't eat that. That's not healthy. That's not good for you." He's probably in a bad mood because he hasn't been eating right. It's the kind of thing that can get very, very wearing if you're somebody who is less interested in eating right. Qwillerin is more interested in eating well than eating right. A distinction which I will remind you all is, again, a thematic portion of this book. In this series, rather, in this book, it comes up again. There's a lot of talk of the pasties because while it is written pasty, as in pasty face, Pasty, it is apparently actually pronounced pasty to rhyme with nasty, which is why one of the restaurants in Pickaxe is known as the Nasty Pasty. And so Qwillerin, of course, this is a murder series, a murder mystery series, gets involved with a guy who is suspicious about a whole bunch of things. He accidentally pulls a dead body up out of the lake, which, while he is on a pretty much completely illicit fishing trip, that he went on out of curiosity, if nothing else. And then the guy that he got to talking to, who he feels a sort of a kinship with, a guy who is also from the big city, who is a former police officer, who is willing to talk crime shop with Qwillerin, and he's found murdered the next day, and so, he gets involved in it, into looking into it and trying to figure out who it was that did it. Coco helps him by, hitting buttons on a tape player and knocking books off of a shelf that have notes stuffed into the middle of them, and doing the death dance, which is apparently the particularly striking circling of particular spots that Coco does when some sort of death is involved. And so, throughout this book, though, Qwillerin, he invites Rosemary up, and she comes up, and they hit that point of it's just not working out. He prefers somebody who's a little bit sharper, who's a little more intellectual, who finds his sense of humor a little funnier. And she finds him a little too flip and a little too not quite enough. And so they wind up breaking up by the end of the book. And Qwillerin winds up really genuinely just not being sure that he wants to go back to the city. And as I said, this is the book where everything changes, because at the end of this book, Qwillerin, who has spent the first 4 books in a constant state of near poverty, constantly bemoaning the fact that he's out of money, constantly bewailing the fact that he is low on cash and can't afford things and needs to stay at cheap places and isn't sure he can keep the cats fed in the manner to which they have become accustomed, he inherits the Klingenshowen fortune. His Aunt Fanny, Fanny Klingenshowen, who has been going by Francesca because she wants to be more sophisticated, she leaves him the entire fortune, and this puts him into a bind because he's told he doesn't get the fortune if he doesn't live in Pickaxe for 5 years. If he goes, then he doesn't get the money. And on top of which, his sense of guilt is pinged because if he goes, all of the money goes to some part of Atlanta for rebuilding, for some neighborhood in Atlanta that's known to be for being not a very nice neighborhood. And Qwillerin, at the end of the book, is faced with what is a very genuine dilemma, because he's a newspaperman. He's a newspaper reporter. That's what he does. It's what he loves. He's just been offered the chance to be an investigative reporter again, to do the job that he set out to do when he first started reporting. And in all of that, he's got that question of, though, does he still want to keep doing it? And honestly, this is millions upon millions of dollars. How do you turn that down? And the book ends on an extremely cliffhangery note as compared to all the other books, because all of the other ones had resolved the issue. Qwillerin found the murderer. He had set himself up nicely in whatever place it was that he was reporting on. He'd usually gotten himself a lovely woman who he could have very pleasant times with. And the book would be nicely resolved. But this one ends with the question of, what is he going to do? If he leaves, all that money leaves with him, even though he doesn't get to keep it. And people in Pickaxe, his Aunt Fanny had told so many people in Pickaxe, had promised them that she would leave them money in her will, had promised all sorts of investments and offers and schemes and whatnots. And so if he leaves, it's not just that he doesn't get the money, it's that these people who were promised money don't get it. And so his decision isn't just riding on, do I want to become super rich but have to live out in the middle of nowhere for 5 years, or do I go home and continue to live the much more restricted, monetarily, life of a reporter, but get to be an investigative reporter, get to go back out there and interview politicians and criminals and look into corruption in government and all that stuff that really makes a reporter gung-ho to do that, because of course that's why so many people get into reporting. They all want to be the next Deep Throat. And that's when they discover that what they have to do is in fact stand around covering the latest competition for who's got the nicest dog sweaters in town, because that's what cub reporters are assigned to do, is to stand around and see who won the dog sweater competition. The thing is that this changes everything. And the whole series changes in this moment, because I'm going to give away in the next book, Qwillerin says yes and leaves everything behind, and that's what really just changes everything. So thanks for coming, and in a couple weeks you'll hear more about how everything changed.